Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku became the king of a villain empire instead of a hero. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air was thin and cold, a stark contrast to the firestorm of hope that had burned in Izuku Midoriya's chest only moments before. The wind, a high, lonely sound, whipped around the rooftop, tugging at the oversized fabric of his black school uniform. It felt like the world was trying to peel him away, to scatter him into nothingness. It was a feeling he was rapidly becoming accustomed to. So no. I honestly don't think you can be a hero without a quirk. The words, spoken by the man Izuku revered more than life itself, were not a shout. They were not delivered with malice or contempt. They were worse. They were calm, pragmatic, and delivered with a finality that felt like a tombstone dropping into place over a grave Izuku hadn't even known he was digging. All Might. The symbol of peace. The man whose smile could save 1,000 souls, whose V for victory pose could halt the most brazen of criminals, stood before him not as a titan of justice, but as a gaunt, skeletal man wreathed in steam. The transformation was shocking, but the words had flayed him open. It's good to have dreams, young man. Just make sure they're attainable. All Might turned, his bony hand on the handle of the rooftop access door. Each movement was a separate, agonizing blow. The hero didn't look back. He didn't see the way Izuku's shoulders, which had been squared with desperate hope, began to curve inward, as if his spine were dissolving. He didn't see the light in those wide, green eyes flicker and die, leaving behind only the glassy sheen of unshed tears. Pros are always laying their lives on the line. The hero continued, his voice muffled by the door. I can't simply say, you can be a hero even without power. The heavy metal door clicked shut. The sound was deafening in the sudden silence. It echoed in Izuku's skull, a percussive, metallic thud that punctuated the end of his life. The life he had dreamed of, the life he had meticulously planned for in 13 notebooks, the life that had been the single, solitary pillar holding up his entire existence. For a long moment, Izuku didn't move. He just stood there, a statue of a boy, feeling the rooftop grit under his worn red sneakers. The city sprawled out below him, a glittering, indifferent beast. Once, he had looked at this view and seen a world of possibilities, of heroes soaring between buildings, of people to be saved. Now all he saw were the gaps between the skyscrapers, dark, empty voids. The tears finally came. They weren't the messy, sobbing bursts he was known for. These were silent, hot tears that traced cold paths down his freckled cheeks. They felt like acid. Each drop was a testament to his failure, his naivety, his utter worthlessness. You're quirkless! The jeers of his childhood classmates echoed in the wind. You'd be lucky to be a cop who picks up scraps after a hero fight. The dismissive words of a career counselor. You want to be a hero so bad? I've got a time-saving idea for you. If you think you'll have a quirk in your next life, go take a swan dive off a roof. Kaken's voice, sharp and cruel, was the loudest of all. Izuku's gaze drifted, almost involuntarily, to the low railing at the edge of the roof. It was just a few feet away. 1 step. 2. A small climb. And then, what? Would he have a quirk in his next life? Or would he just be a messy splatter on the pavement that some poor, overworked hero would have to deal with? Another statistic. Another piece of trash for society to sweep away. He took a shuffling step forward, his shoes scuffing against the concrete. The wind picked up, howling a mournful song. He wasn't going to do it. He knew he wasn't. He was a coward. But the fact that the thought was there, that Kaken's advice had resurfaced as a plausible, almost logical option in the wreckage of his mind, that scared him more than anything. It meant that All Might had not just broken his dream. He had broken him. The hope was a phantom limb now, aching with an emptiness that was more painful than any physical injury. He clutched at his chest, his fingers digging into the thin material of his shirt, right over his heart. He had been so stupid. So stupid. To think that hard work and analysis could ever bridge the chasm between him and everyone else. He was a bug trying to convince the birds he could fly. He sank to his knees, the rough surface of the roof scraping against his trousers. He didn't notice. The vibrant, living city below became a blur of indistinct lights and muted sounds. He was alone, utterly and completely alone on this rooftop, adrift in a universe that had made it clear, in no uncertain terms, that there was no place for him in it. He stayed there for an eternity, or maybe just 10 minutes. Time had ceased to have meaning. The sun began to dip lower, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, colors he couldn't appreciate. They felt like a mockery. That was cruel. The voice was not in his head. It was real. It was close. It was a low, cultured baritone, smooth as polished obsidian, and carrying an ancient weight that made the air itself seem to grow heavy. Izuku's head snapped up. His tear-filled eyes struggled to focus. Standing a dozen feet away, half swallowed by the long shadows cast by a ventilation unit, was a man. He hadn't been there a second ago. Izuku would have heard the door, would have sensed a presence. This man had simply appeared. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a dark, tailored suit that seemed to drink the fading light. But it was his face, or lack thereof, that held Izuku's attention. The upper half of his head was a mass of scar tissue, twisting down to where his eyes and nose should have been. Below that, a calm, almost gentle mouth was set in a neutral line. He wore no mask, yet he felt more hidden than any villain Izuku had ever seen. A series of tubes snaked from a life support collar around his neck, disappearing under his suit jacket. Izuku scrambled backward, his heart hammering against his ribs with a sudden, primal fear. This man's presence was nothing like All Might's. All Might was a blazing sun, a force of nature you could see coming from a mile away. This man was a black hole, a gravitational center of pure, silent power that pulled everything toward him. He didn't even truly see you, did he? The man continued, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. His movements were fluid, unhurried. He was a predator that knew its prey was already trapped. He saw a label, quirkless. And in his mind, the conversation was already over. Izuku couldn't speak. His throat was tight with fear and residual grief. Who was this? A villain? All Might is a symbol, the man said, his voice laced with a faint, mocking amusement. And symbols are simple things. They are strong. They are good. They are black and white. They have no room for nuance, for complexity. No room for a boy with the heart of a hero but none of the requisite genetic lottery winnings. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, striking the rawest parts of Izuku's soul. This stranger understood. In a way All Might, his idol, hadn't. This terrifying figure seemed to see right through him. You're trembling, the man observed. Fear is a logical reaction. But you are not afraid of me, not really. You are afraid that I am right. He took another step. Izuku's back hit the cold metal of a large air conditioning unit. He was cornered. Let me introduce myself. Some call me a symbol of evil. A convenient boogeyman to frighten children and rally the masses. But you, Izuku Midoriya, may call me a purveyor of potential. He tilted his scarred head. I have been watching you for some time. You watching me? Izuku stammered, his voice a pathetic squeak. Oh yes. The boy who runs headfirst toward danger without a thought for his own safety. The boy who obsessively studies heroes and villains, filling notebook after notebook with brilliant, incisive analysis. The boy who tried to save his childhood tormentor from a villain that had incapacitated a dozen pro-heroes. The man's lips curved into what might have been a smile. It was not a comforting expression. All Might chastised you for that, didn't he? Called you reckless? He saw a liability. I saw a weapon. Izuku stared, bewildered. His analysis? His notebooks? Everyone had always called them creepy, nerdy, a waste of time. A sad hobby for a boy who couldn't accept reality. That notebook of yours, the man gestured vaguely with a gloved hand. The one for the future. Volume 13, I believe? I'd wager your breakdown of Kamui Wood's weaknesses regarding fire and non-arbor-based structures is more detailed than anything the Hero Public Safety Commission has on file. Your assessment of Mount Lady's collateral damage potential and its psychological effect on her public image was astute. And your notes on Eraserhead, identifying his reliance on sight and the predictable rhythm of his attack patterns, masterful. Izuku's blood ran cold. How could he know that? How could he possibly know the contents of his private journals? Your mind, young man, is a far greater power than some simple mutation that lets a man stretch his limbs or shoot fire from his hands, the man declared, his voice resonating with conviction. But in this world, this broken, shallow society that All Might has built his pedestal upon, it is worthless. This world doesn't reward intellect. It rewards spectacle. It celebrates brute force and flashy light shows. It is a cult of personality built on the lie that power equals righteousness. He was now only a few feet away. Izuku could see the faint, rhythmic pulse of fluid in the tubes around his neck. Tell me, Izuku. When you look at Endeavor, the number 2 hero, do you see a hero? Or do you see a man consumed by a furious, burning pride, a man who causes more damage than he prevents, a man who terrorizes his own family in his quest to surpass a rival he can never beat? Izuku's eyes widened. He'd had thoughts like that, late at night, scribbling away in his room. Thoughts he'd immediately felt guilty for. When you watch the news, do you see heroes saving people? Or do you see celebrities endorsing products, fighting for ratings, and choosing their battles based on camera coverage and public appeal? This heroism is a multi-trillion yen industry. A game. And you, my boy, have been trying to play without being dealt any cards. The man leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to an intimate, conspiratorial whisper. The world is not fair. You have always known this, haven't you? Deep down, every time a teacher praised Kaken for his powerful quirk while ignoring his cruelty. Every time a doctor looked at you with pity. Every time you saw a hero succeed not through courage or strategy, but simply because their power was a perfect counter. You knew. But you kept hoping. You put your faith in the symbol, believing that if you were just good enough, just pure enough, he would see your worth. He straightened up, spreading his hands in a gesture of grand finality. And today, he looked you in the eye and told you that you have no worth. The pedestal you placed him on has crumbled, and he has left you in the rubble. Izuku couldn't breathe. It was as if this man had reached into his chest, pulled out his shattered heart, and was now holding it up for him to see, explaining every single fracture and flaw. He wasn't just validating his pain, he was giving it a name, a shape, a purpose. The despair that had been a formless, crushing weight began to crystallize into something else. Something hard and cold and sharp. Anger. A deep, glacial anger. At All Might for his blindness. At Kaken for his cruelty. At the world for its unfairness. And most of all, at himself, for being so weak and naive for so long. Who are you? Izuku asked again, his voice stronger now, laced with this newfound icy rage. The man's smile widened. I am the one who understands that true power is not the quirk you are born with, but the ability to take, to control, and to command. They call me All for One. The name slammed into Izuku's consciousness like a freight train. All for One. The ultimate villain of modern history. The shadowy emperor of the underworld. The arch-nemesis of All Might, rumored to be dead for years. He was a figure of myth, a ghost story whispered among villains. And he was standing on a rooftop, talking to a quirkless, 15-year-old reject. Fear tried to reassert itself, but the anger was a stronger shield. Why would this legendary evil be here with him? As if reading his mind, All for One answered. Why am I here? Because I saw what the symbol of peace was too blind to see. A successor. Not in body but in mind. A brilliant strategist, a keen observer, an empathetic heart twisted into a knot of despair. A perfect blank slate upon which a new world order can be written. He extended a hand. It was not a threatening gesture. It was an invitation. Don't try to be a piece in their broken game, Izuku Midoriya. Let me teach you how to build a new one. A world where worth is not determined by an accident of birth. A world of order, of structure, where the powerful are not celebrated, but utilized, and the weak are not pitted, but protected under a system of absolute control. A world where a mind like yours is not a liability, but the most valuable asset of all. Izuku stared at the offered hand, then back at the scarred face. The words echoed in the hollow space where his dreams used to be. Build a new one. It was an insane, impossible proposition. It was the offer of a monster, but what other offers did he have? The world of heroes had slammed its door in his face. Society had labeled him a defective product. His only alternative was a life of mediocrity, forever looking up at the sky at what he could never be, the ghost of All Might's words haunting him until his dying day. Or this, a chance to take his pain, his anger, his useless knowledge, and forge it into something. A chance to prove them all wrong. Not by becoming a hero in their system, but by shattering their system entirely. I have no power, Izuku whispered, the words a final, reflexive admission of his own ingrained self-loathing. All for One's smile was almost paternal. Power can be given. It is the will to use it that cannot be taught. And your will, young Midoriya, has been tempered in the fires of rejection for 15 years. It is stronger than you know. He paused, then added, as a sign of my good faith, a small gift. To show you what I mean. From the palm of All for One's extended hand, thin tendrils of crackling, crimson energy snaked through the air. They were slow, almost hesitant, not like an attack but like an offering. They reached across the gap and touched Izuku's forehead. He flinched, but there was no pain. Instead, a sensation unlike anything he had ever experienced flooded his mind. It was not a physical feeling. It was a click, a profound, fundamental click, as if 1,000 misaligned gears in his brain had suddenly snapped into perfect, synchronous harmony. The world, which had been a muted, blurry mess of grief, exploded into focus with breathtaking clarity. He could feel the subtle vibrations of the rooftop beneath him, identifying the distinct hums of at least 4 different ventilation systems. He could hear conversations from the street below, not as a dull roar, but as individual, overlapping threads of dialogue. The patterns of the city lights were no longer a random sprawl. They were a grid, a network, with arteries of traffic and nodes of activity. His own mind felt vast. His thoughts, usually a tangled mess of anxiety and frantic hope, were now orderly, efficient, and lightning fast. The grief and anger were still there, but they were no longer overwhelming emotions. They were data points. Fuel. What did you do? Izuku breathed, his own voice sounding sharper, clearer in his ears. A simple quirk. A trifle I took from a failed stock market analyst years ago. It enhances cognitive processing, pattern recognition, and information retention. Let's call it synaptic flow. It complements what you already possess. It does not give you intelligence, it merely unshackles it. A key for a lock that was already built. Izuku looked at his hands, then back at the city. He saw it all differently now. He saw the flight paths of heroes not as glorious streaks across the sky, but as predictable, exploitable patrol routes. He saw buildings not as monuments of hope, but as tactical vantage points with structural vulnerabilities. He saw the crowds of people not as innocents to be saved, but as a fickle, powerful resource that could be manipulated with the right leverage. The world hadn't changed. But he had. All for One's hand was still extended. The choice was still there. But it no longer felt like a choice. It felt like an inevitability. It was the next logical step in a sequence that had begun the moment the doctor had uttered the word quirkless. Slowly, deliberately, Izuku Midoriya raised his hand. His fingers were trembling, but not from fear. It was the vibration of a string pulled taut, ready to be played. He placed his small, scarred hand into the gloved, waiting palm of the symbol of evil. All for One's grip was firm, cool, and possessive. It felt like a contract being sealed. A soul being signed away. A wise decision, my boy, All for One said, his voice resonating with the quiet satisfaction of a grandmaster placing the final piece in a game of chess. Your education begins now. He released Izuku's hand. The nascent villain king and his new mentor stood in silence for a moment, the setting sun casting their long shadows across the rooftop. Izuku turned his gaze back to the sprawling city one last time. The tears were gone, his eyes dry and frighteningly clear. He looked down at the streets where heroes patrolled, at the agencies that housed them, at the society that worshipped them. He saw it not with the adoration of a fan, but with the cold, calculating appraisal of a conqueror. His bag was still slung over his shoulder. Inside, nestled safely, was Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 13. Its pages were filled with the secrets, weaknesses, and flaws of the very people he once prayed to become. It was no longer a journal of worship. It was a book of blueprints. a manual for their destruction, and on the first blank page, a new title was already forming in his mind, written in the icy clarity of his newfound purpose: The Architecture of a Broken System. The boy named Izuku Midoriya had died on that rooftop. In his place, something new and terrible was taking its first, chilling breath. The sterile scent of ozone and polished chrome filled the cavernous chamber. 3 years had passed since Izuku Midoriya had taken all for one's hand on that rooftop. The boy who had stood there was gone, scraped away and remade molecule by molecule in this subterranean palace of steel and shadow. The world thought him a tragic statistic, a runaway, another forgotten face swallowed by the city. The truth was far more profound. He had not been swallowed. He had been forged. A swirling vortex of purple-black mist coalesced 20 feet in front of him. From its depths, a hand fashioned from the same nebulous energy shot forward, aimed directly at his throat. Izuku didn't flinch. He didn't even breathe. The synaptic flow quirk he had received that first day had become as natural as his own heartbeat, mapping the trajectory, speed, and energy of the attack in a fraction of a second. His mind was a silent, frictionless machine. Attack vector, direct, linear. Velocity, 45 meters per second. Composition, spatially warped plasma. Counter, not opposition, but redirection. He moved. It wasn't the desperate, frantic scramble of his past life. This was an act of pure economy. He pivoted on the ball of his left foot, his body flowing like water around the attack. As the misty hand shot past his ear, he raised his own right hand, palm open. A faint, almost invisible shimmer, like heat haze on a summer road, enveloped his skin. He didn't strike the attack, he merely brushed against its side. The effect was instantaneous and startling. The projectile of dark mist, its momentum suddenly and violently diverted, twisted in midair and slammed into the far wall of the training chamber. There was no explosion, only the unsettling thump of warp space impacting reinforced concrete, leaving a spiderweb of cracks. "Your precision improves, young master," came Kurogiri's synthesized, placid voice from the swirling portal. "Your control over the kinetic reversal quirk is nearly absolute." Izuku came to a rest, his posture perfectly balanced. He was taller now, his frame lean but corded with dense, wiry muscle developed through a brutal regimen. The baby fat had vanished from his face, leaving behind sharp angles and a defined jawline. His green eyes, once wide with a naive eagerness to please, were now calm, analytical, and held a chilling depth. The stutter was a ghost of a memory, and his voice, when he chose to use it, was measured and clear. "The quirk is efficient," Izuku stated, his tone neutral. He was analyzing his own performance. "But it's purely defensive. It has no initiative. Its weakness is an opponent who refuses to attack directly. Your warp gates remain the primary threat." As if on cue, a dozen smaller portals opened around him, peppering the air like black wounds. From each, a fist, a foot, or a tendril of mist lashed out. It was a three-dimensional assault designed to overwhelm. Izuku's eyes were unfocused, his gaze turned inward. He wasn't tracking each individual attack. Synaptic flow was processing the entire room as a single, complex data set. The kinetic reversal shimmered around his body, not as a solid shield, but as a fluid, reactive field. He moved in a tight, contained dance, his limbs intercepting, deflecting, and redirecting. A fist aimed at his head was nudged slightly, causing it to punch the floor. A kick aimed at his ribs was twisted, forcing the leg to extend into the path of another attack from a different portal. He was using Kurogiri's own assault to defeat itself. "Your analytical ability remains your greatest weapon," Kurogiri observed, the portals vanishing as quickly as they appeared. "You do not fight the battle, you solve it. Fighting is inefficient," Izuku replied, smoothing a wrinkle in his simple gray training fatigues. "It's a contest of attrition. Solving is a matter of finding the correct variable to manipulate. It is absolute." This was his new life. Physical training was merely one component of a curriculum designed by the greatest criminal mastermind in history. His days were not spent in a classroom learning algebra and literature, but in a sterile, soundproofed study that resembled a CEO's office fused with a university library. There All for One himself was his personal tutor. His education had begun with history, not the sanitized version fed to the public, but the real, bloody history of the age of quirks. He learned of the chaos, the warlords, the societal collapse, and the rise of the first vigilantes who, in All for One's telling, were not saviors but opportunists who imposed their own brand of tyranny. All Might was not the first symbol of peace, merely the most successful marketer of the concept. Then came economics. All for One taught him to see society not as a collection of people, but as a complex machine of incentives and resources. He learned how hero agencies were corporations, how support gear companies sponsored heroes like athletes, and how a single, well-placed villain attack could manipulate stock prices, ruin careers, and shift massive amounts of capital. He spent months running simulations, learning to crash markets with a few keystrokes and a whispered rumor. Politics was the art of leveraging belief. He read every political theorist from Machiavelli to modern-day sociologists. He studied the inner workings of the Hero Public Safety Commission, memorizing its charter, its key personnel, their political affiliations, their documented weaknesses, and their hidden scandals. The HPSC, AFO taught him, was the true brain of the hero system. The heroes were just a flashy, disposable muscle. His education was punctuated by the reception of new quirks. They were never flashy or powerful in the traditional sense. All for One called them tools for the mind. The second quirk he received came 6 months into his training. He had been tasked with memorizing the blueprints for every major hero agency in Tokyo. After a week of agonizing effort, he had managed to retain only a fraction of the data. All for One had entered the study, a silent, imposing figure. "Your organic memory is a limitation," the man had stated simply. "A flaw in the hardware. Let us correct it." He had placed a hand on Izuku's head. The sensation was less dramatic than the first time, a cool, quiet trickle of energy that felt like cool water flowing directly into his brain. When it was over, All for One had pushed a thick, 1,000-page tome across the desk. It was a detailed financial history of Detnerat, the lifestyle support company. "Read," was the only command. Izuku opened the book. As his eyes scanned the pages, something incredible happened. The words, the charts, the numbers, they weren't just being read, they were being archived. He could feel them slotting into place in his mind, perfectly indexed, instantly retrievable. He finished the entire book in under an hour. "Recite the earnings report from the third quarter, 87 years ago," All for One had tested. Izuku closed his eyes, and the page appeared in his mind's eye, as crisp and clear as if it were still in front of him. He recited the numbers, down to the last decimal point, without hesitation. He now possessed an eidetic memory. His brain had become a perfect, incorruptible hard drive. The third quirk was the most unsettling. A year later, All for One had brought in a low-level villain, a captured informant who had been selling secrets to a rival gang. "The final pillar of your primary education," All for One had explained, his voice devoid of emotion. "Strategy, knowledge, they are useless if you are acting on flawed information. You must be able to discern the truth. Not just from lies, but from the more dangerous half-truths and omissions." The transfer of this quirk was jarring. It felt like a wire being connected directly to his emotional core. Suddenly, the room was filled with noise, but it wasn't sound. It was the informant's terror, a cloying, sweaty feeling that clung to the air. It was All for One's cold, ancient amusement, a vast, placid ocean of darkness. And beneath it all, his own simmering, controlled anger. "Asked him a question," All for One instructed. "Did you betray us?" Izuku asked, his voice steady despite the sensory overload. "And no! I swear!" the man stammered. The words were a lie. Izuku didn't need to see a twitch or hear a tremor in the man's voice. He could feel it. The man's statement was a thin, brittle sheet of ice over a roiling sea of deceit. It was a profound, nauseating dissonance. He could feel the shape of the truth the man was trying to hide. "You didn't sell secrets to the Shai Hasaikai," Izuku stated calmly. "You gave them to them for free, in exchange for protection for your family." The informant's eyes widened in terror. All for One made a gesture, and Kurogiri warped the man away to an unknown fate. "It is a sensory quirk," AFO explained. "It allows you to perceive the emotional resonance behind a person's words." A lie creates a discordance. With practice, you will be able to not only detect falsehoods but to sense the underlying emotions driving them: fear, greed, loyalty, love. You will learn to read people as easily as you now read books. We shall call it empath's deceit. With these tools, synaptic flow, eidetic memory, and empath's deceit, backed by the defensive shield of kinetic reversal, Izuku was rebuilt. He was no longer a person, he was an intelligence apparatus, a living weapon of strategy and manipulation. But he was not the only student in this dark academy. The door to the study slid open with a hiss, and Tamura Shigaraki slouched in, scratching furiously at his neck. 3 years had done little to mature the man-child. He was still lanky and unkempt, his pale skin flaky, his cracked lips pulled back in a perpetual sneer. He wore a simple black hoodie, and his red eyes scanned the room with a restless, destructive energy. "Sensei," he rasped, his voice like gravel. "The Nomu are ready. The grunts are getting antsy. When do we get to break stuff? When do I get to go after All Might?" All for One, who was observing Izuku's analysis of a complex algorithm on a holographic screen, didn't even turn around. "Patience, Tamura. A frontal assault is a child's tantrum. It accomplishes nothing of substance." Shigaraki's gaze fell on Izuku, and his eyes narrowed with a potent cocktail of jealousy and contempt. "Still playing with your toys, Deku?" he sneered, deliberately using the old, cruel nickname. "What's the final boss in your little game today? A tough math problem?" Izuku didn't react to the insult. He simply turned from the screen, his calm green eyes meeting Shigaraki's manic red ones. The lie detection quirk flared to life, and Izuku could feel the waves of insecurity and desperate need for approval rolling off Shigaraki. He was a child screaming for his father's attention. "The term is useless, Tamura," Izuku corrected him, his voice flat. "And it's a name I have chosen to discard. You may refer to me by my proper name, or what?" Shigaraki shot back, taking a step forward, his hand twitching as if itching to decay something. "You'll bore me to death with a lecture? You're just a quirkless charity case Sensei picked up, a pet project. I am his true successor." The lie was so blatant, so steeped in desperate hope, that it was almost pitiful. "Your claim to succession is based on your lineage to Nanashimura, a sentimental tie that Sensei holds," Izuku stated, his voice clinical. He had accessed this information from AFO's private files. "My position is based on merit. Your desire is for chaotic destruction, a goal with no endgame beyond personal satisfaction. It is strategically bankrupt. You want to smash the board game. I intend to win the game, and then redesign the board." Shigaraki's face contorted with rage. "You talk like him," he shrieked, pointing a trembling finger. "You're just a cheap copy. I have real power. I can destroy anything I touch, a powerful quirk, to be sure," Izuku conceded without a hint of sarcasm. "But it requires you to touch your target. A limitation that makes you vulnerable to any ranged fighter with a modicum of intelligence. Your entire strategy is predicated on your opponent making a mistake. Mine is predicated on my opponent following a path I have already laid for them. That's enough, both of you." All for One's voice cut through the tension, imbued with an authority that made the very air vibrate. Shigaraki flinched as if struck and immediately fell silent, though his baleful glare remained fixed on Izuku. "Tamura, your purpose is to be a symbol of fear and chaos. A blade to be wielded," AFO said, finally turning to face them. "Izuku's purpose is to be the mind that wields it. You are two sides of the same coin. Try to remember that." Shigaraki grumbled, scratching his neck with renewed vigor, but he didn't argue further. He knew his place, however much he hated it. Later that evening, Izuku stood before a floor-to-ceiling window in his private quarters. The window was, in fact, a high-resolution screen projecting a live feed of the city above. It was a constant reminder of the world he had left behind, and the one he intended to conquer. All for One entered the room, his presence announced by the soft hiss of his life support. "The time has come for you to cast off the last vestiges of your old life," the man said. "Izuku Midoriya was a victim. The leader of our new world must be a concept, an ideal. He needs a name." Izuku didn't turn from the window. He had been considering this for months, running through countless possibilities. He could choose something fearsome like Dreadnought or Overlord, but those were the names of thugs and tyrants. He was something more. My entire existence was defined by what I lacked. Izuku began, his voice a low murmur. I was a zero. An empty space in a world of powers. A statistical anomaly. My teachers, my classmates, even my own mother, they looked at me and saw a void where a quirk should have been. He finally turned to face his mentor. There was no pain in his expression, only a profound, chilling acceptance. I will not run from that emptiness. I will embrace it. Society cast me into the void. So I will become the void. He paused, letting the name settle in the air. I will be the empty space into which this corrupt hero's society collapses. I will be the nothingness from which a new, perfect order is born. They will call me Void. All for one was silent for a long moment. Izuku felt the deep, ancient mind behind the scarred visage appraising him, weighing his words. The calm, gentle mouth curved into a smile of genuine, paternal pride. Excellent. All for one breathed. It is a name of philosophy, of purpose. It is a name a king would choose. The next day, Void was summoned to the main strategy room. It was a vast, circular chamber dominated by a holographic display table. All for one sat at the head of a large conference table, with Shigaraki sulking to his left, and Kurogiri standing impassively behind him. You have completed your primary education, All for one announced. You have absorbed theory for 3 years. It is time for a practical application. The League of Villains is stagnant. It is a collection of street thugs and malcontents. It requires direction. It requires a victory. Tamura's plan is to unleash the Nomu on a civilian center to draw out All Might. It'll be epic! Shigaraki cackled. Total chaos! All Might will show up, and I'll get to melt his face. Void looked at the plan outlined on the holotable, a crude, red arrow pointing at a shopping mall. He felt a flicker of something akin to pity. This plan will fail, Void stated, not as an opinion, but as a fact. Shigaraki shot to his feet. What did you say, you little? This plan is predicated on 2 flawed assumptions. Void continued, completely ignoring the outburst and walking to the table. He waved a hand, and the simple map was replaced by a complex web of data. First, that All Might will be the one to respond. Hero deployment is dictated by proximity, threat level, and public relations value. A random attack on a mall is more likely to draw in a dozen mid-tier heroes before All Might is even alerted. Second, it assumes you can defeat him. You cannot. The Nomu you have is engineered to counter his physical strength, but it lacks tactical intelligence. All Might is not just strong, he is experienced. He will identify its weakness and exploit it within minutes. He looked directly at Shigaraki. The result? Your Nomu will be defeated, your forces scattered, and you will be lucky to escape. You will have accomplished nothing but wasting valuable assets and proving your own incompetence. It is not a strategy. It is a suicide mission born of ego. Shigaraki was trembling with a fury so intense he seemed to be vibrating. But before he could speak, All for one raised a hand, silencing him. You have identified the flaws in his plan, Void, his mentor said, his voice laced with anticipation. Then present your own. This was it. His thesis. The final exam. Void took a deep breath, the cool, conditioned air filling his lungs. He gestured to the holotable, and a new diagram appeared, a detailed schematic of a heavily fortified, nondescript building in the Mizudafa Prefecture. This is the Hero Public Safety Commission National Data Archive. Void began, his voice resonating with newfound authority. It is the central nervous system of Hero Society. It contains every hero's license, patrol schedule, financial records, support contracts, and most importantly, their quirk registration files, including their documented weaknesses. He zoomed in on the schematic. Attacking heroes directly is foolish. It's like trying to kill a hydra by cutting off its heads. They are replaceable celebrities. The true power lies here, in the bureaucracy that controls them. My plan is not a frontal assault. It is a surgical strike. He laid out the plan in 3 phases, his voice calm and precise. Phase 1, Infiltration. 2 weeks ago, I had Sensei acquired the quirk of a low-level data entry clerk who was recently fired from this facility. The quirk allows him to tag digital files with a dormant virus. We have already had him apply for a position at a third-party IT support company that services the HPSC. Once he is inside, he will upload our virus into their system during a routine maintenance check. It is not an attack, it is a key. Phase 2, the event. We will not use our own forces. We will orchestrate an attack on UA High School. A large-scale, public, but ultimately non-lethal distraction. Shigaraki can lead this. His desire for chaos will make the distraction convincing. He gave a brief, almost imperceptible nod to his rival, a calculated concession to his ego. While every major hero and news outlet is focused on UA, I will activate the virus. Phase 3, the Symphony of Collapse. The data on the table shifted again, showing streams of information flowing out from the HPSC building. The virus does not destroy. It copies and releases. We will leak a carefully curated selection of their most damaging files to the public. The secret identities of a dozen heroes. Evidence of Endeavor's backroom deals to suppress rival agencies. Financial records showing massive embezzlement by the Commission's president. Proof that certain heroic victories were staged for publicity. We will not attack the heroes. We will destroy the public's trust in them. We will poison the well from which their entire authority springs. He fell silent. The room was still. Shigaraki stared, his mouth slightly agape, a flicker of grudging understanding in his eyes. This was a level of strategy he couldn't even comprehend. Void turned to his mentor. We will acquire terabytes of compromising data to be used as leverage. We will sow paranoia and dissent within the hero community itself. We will achieve a massive strategic victory without risking a single high-value asset in a direct confrontation. We are not smashing the game board, Tamura, he said, his eyes locking with his rival's. We are stealing the rulebook and rewriting it in our favor. All for one was completely still, the scarred mask of his face unreadable. But Void, with his empathic quirk, could feel it. A wave of immense, profound satisfaction rolling off the ancient villain. It was the pride of a master craftsman seeing his creation not only function perfectly but exceed all expectations. He rose slowly from his chair, a low, rumbling chuckle echoing in the vast chamber. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated triumph. He walked over to Shigaraki, who was still processing the sheer scale of Void's plan, and placed a heavy hand on his shoulder. Watch and learn, Tamura. All for one said, his voice soft but carrying the weight of a decree. His gaze, however, was fixed on Void, the boy he had found broken on a rooftop and molded into the heir of his empire. Watch and learn. This is how you truly change the world. The unforeseen simulation joint was a monument to heroic ambition. A colossal glass dome that shimmered like a soap bubble under the midday sun. It contained within its manufactured world a dozen different disasters, all patiently waiting to be tamed by the next generation of heroes. To the students of UA's Class 1A, it was the most exciting classroom imaginable. Whoa! Is that a shipwreck? Kaminari Denki's voice buzzed with static-laced excitement. And a landslide! So manly! Kirishima Aijiro added, punching a hardened fist into his palm. They stood on a central plaza at the bottom of a grand stone staircase, a gaggle of brightly colored costumes and even brighter aspirations. Before them, the Pro Hero 13 gestured with their famously oversized gloves, their voice echoing slightly in the vast space. As I was saying, my quirk, Black Hole, can be a great tool for rescue, but it can also easily kill. This facility, the USJ, is designed to teach you how to use your fantastic abilities in a controlled environment to save lives. Shota Aizawa, their homeroom teacher, stood off to the side, his posture a study in lethargic vigilance. His capture weapon was draped loosely around his neck, and his tired eyes scanned the facility, already cataloging exits and potential threats. It was second nature. He noted the comms tower at the far end, the sealed main entrance behind the students, and the slight flicker in the lights near the mountain zone. Probably just a power surge. All right, that's enough. Aizawa's bored voice cut through 13th's speech. Let's get started. As the students began to murmur with excitement, the lights in the dome didn't just flicker. They died. For a single, silent second, The USJ was plunged into near darkness, the only illumination coming from the muted sunlight filtering through the dome. Then, the emergency lights kicked on, casting long, eerie red shadows across the plaza. In the center of the plaza, directly in front of the fountain, the air began to twist. It wasn't a flicker or a shimmer. It was a violent tearing, a patch of reality being ripped open to reveal a swirling vortex of purple-black mist. It expanded rapidly, a silent, gaping wound in the world. Aizawa's posture snapped from lethargic to predatory. 13. Protect the students! This is real! From the depths of the portal, figures began to emerge. Not a chaotic mob, but a steady, organized stream of some of the ugliest, most brutish-looking villains Aizawa had ever seen. They fanned out with a disciplined silence that was far more terrifying than any battle cry, and at the forefront stood two figures. A lanky man covered in dismembered hands, scratching furiously at his neck, and a towering, monstrous creature with an exposed brain and dead, unblinking eyes. So the schedule we stole was real after all. The hand-covered man, Shigaraki, rasped. What a shame. I was so looking forward to killing All Might. Aizawa's eyes glowed red, his hair levitating as he activated his quirk. They knew our schedule. This was a planned infiltration. Kaminari, try the comms. The electric user touched a finger to the communicator on his ear. Nothing. It's completely jammed. It was then that a new sound filled the USJ. It wasn't a villain's laugh or a hero's shout. It was a voice. Calm, articulate, and amplified, seemingly coming from everywhere at once. It was the voice of a young man, laced with a chilling, clinical detachment. Welcome, students and faculty of UA High. Please do not be alarmed. This is not a mindless attack. It is a lesson. Your first, and perhaps most important, lesson in the fundamental flaws of modern heroism. Aizawa scanned the villains, the rafters, the entrance. He couldn't locate the source. A broadcasting quirk? Eraserhead. The voice continued, addressing him directly. Your combat prowess is legendary in the underground scene. A quirk that levels the playing field, combined with exceptional martial skill. However, your operational weakness is attrition. You cannot blink, and your endurance, while impressive, is finite. Team Gamma, you have your orders. Engage and exhaust. On cue, a dozen villains, all brawlers with simple physical enhancement quirks, broke from the main group and charged Aizawa. They weren't an elite force. They were fodder, a living, breathing wall of meat designed to wear him down. Aizawa launched himself forward, his capture weapon lashing out, erasing quirks and binding limbs in a practiced, deadly dance. But for every one he took down, two more took their place, their attacks relentless and coordinated. 13. The disembodied voice instructed calmly. Your quirk is formidable but has a singular, fatal flaw. You cannot use it on a target directly in front of an ally without risking their life. Kurogyri, execute dispersal pattern Delta. The swirling mist behind Shigaraki surged forward, engulfing the students. It wasn't a chaotic wave. It was a precise, multi-pronged entity. Before 13 could activate Black Hole without endangering the children, the world dissolved into a maelstrom of purple and black. Katsuki Bakugo felt a sickening lurch as the ground vanished from beneath him. He snarled, letting off a series of small, sharp explosions from his palms to try and orient himself, but it was like swimming in tar. Then, just as suddenly, he was falling, landing with a solid thud on the floor of a ruined, hollowed-out building in what was clearly the USJ's collapse zone. Deku! He roared, assuming his absent rival was somehow behind this. But the only person who landed nearby was Kirishima, who quickly hardened his skin. Whoa! What was that? The redhead asked, shaking his head. Before they could get their bearings, figures emerged from the rubble around them. Not mindless thugs, but villains armed with non-lethal capture gear, high-tensile nets, fast-hardening foam sprayers, and electrified bolas. The voice returned, now seemingly localized through a hidden speaker in the ruins. Katsuki Bakugo. Quirk, Explosion. A versatile and powerful ability with immense destructive potential. However, you are over-reliant on overwhelming force and prone to predictable, right-hook-heavy attack patterns. Your psychological profile indicates a severe superiority complex, making you susceptible to goading and misdirection. Your objective here is not to win. It is simply to keep you occupied. Bakugo's face twisted into a mask of pure fury. Who the hell are you? Show yourself, you damned coward! He blasted forward, a blur of orange and black, but the villains didn't engage him head-on. They scattered, using the debris for cover, firing their capture weapons from a distance. It wasn't a fight, it was a frustrating, infuriating game of cat and mouse. Every time he lunged for one, another would fire foam at his feet, forcing him to blast himself free. Across the USJ, similar scenes were playing out, each a tailor-made nightmare. In the mountain zone, Shoto Todoroki found himself assailed by villains whose quirks generated thick, vision-obscuring fog and disorienting sonic waves. His ice attacks were powerful but indiscriminate, freezing entire sections of the mountain with no visible targets to aim for. Shoto Todoroki. The voice echoed through the peaks. Immense power, shackled by emotional trauma. You refuse to use your left side, having your combat potential and creating a critical buildup of frost that slows your movements over time. Your challenge is not to defeat these men, it is to defeat yourself. A battle you have been losing for a decade. Todoroki froze, not from his own ice, but from the shock of hearing his deepest secret laid bare by an unseen enemy. The symphony of collapse was being conducted with masterful precision. Each group of students was isolated and pitted against villains specifically chosen to counter or frustrate their quirks and personalities. It wasn't a battle for supremacy. It was a series of cruel, live-action deconstructions. The students weren't being fought. They were being analyzed. Meanwhile, at the central plaza, Aizawa was beginning to falter. His eyes burned from the strain of keeping his quirk active, and his movements were becoming sluggish. He had taken down over 20 villains, but the tide was endless. He saw an opening and lunged for Shigaraki, the apparent leader, but the hulking gnome moved with impossible speed, intercepting him. A monstrous fist collided with Aizawa's side, and the sickening crack of breaking ribs echoed in the plaza. The beast slammed him into the ground again and again, a relentless, brutal assault. Shigaraki cackled, a dry, grating sound. This is my Noma! He was made to kill All Might! You're just a warm-up! The voice, however, cut through his glee, its tone now holding a hint of reprimand. Shigaraki, your emotional outbursts are compromising the mission objective. The goal is incapacitation, not murder. Cease your gloating and adhere to the plan. Shigaraki froze, a flicker of fear crossing his face before being replaced by a resentful scowl. He muttered something under his breath and gestured for the Nomu to hold Aizawa down, crushing his arm into the concrete. Back in the collapse zone, Bakugo was seething. He and Kirishima had dispatched most of the small fry villains, but it had been a tiresome, pointless effort. They were covered in hardened foam and tangled in nets. That voice! Bakugo growled, ripping a net apart with a controlled explosion. It pisses me off. It's like it knows everything. It's creepy, that's for sure. Kirishima agreed, trying to chip foam off his arm. It sounds familiar somehow. It was then that Bakugo heard it again, this time without amplification, coming from the entrance of the ruined building. It has been a while, Kaken. Bakugo froze. That name. That tone. He knew that voice better than his own, but it was wrong. It was stripped of all its familiar weakness, all the fear and pathetic admiration. It was flat, cold, and empty. He turned slowly. Standing in the dust-filled archway was a figure that his mind refused to process. He was tall and slender, dressed in a simple but well-tailored black suit with a dark gray tactical vest over it. His face was framed by the same unruly mop of dark green hair, but it was clean, styled just enough to be kept out of his eyes. And his eyes, they were the same brilliant green, but the light in them was gone. There was no hope, no fear, no emotion at all. Only a terrifying, placid intelligence. Freckles still dotted his cheeks, a ghostly reminder of the boy he once was. It was Izuka Midoriya. But it wasn't. Deku? Bakugo whispered, the name leaving his lips as a breath of pure disbelief. The figure's mouth tilted in a faint, dismissive smile. I've shed that name. A relic of a past I was fortunate enough to survive. My name is Void. Kirishima stared, utterly confused. Wait, Bakugo, you know this guy. Is he a friend? He is the one who has been talking, Boyd stated, his gaze never leaving Bakugo's. He held a small, advanced-looking tablet in one hand, which he tapped idly. And no, we are not friends. He was my tormentor, one of the many architects of my education. The pieces clicked into place in Bakugo's mind with the force of a physical blow. The strategic precision, the intimate knowledge of their quirks, the familiar cadence of the voice. It was the creepy, mumbling analysis of the nerd he had bullied his entire life, weaponized and turned against them. No. No way. Bakugo stammered, his mind reeling. You're quirkless. You're a pebble. What is this? What the hell are you doing with these scumbags, Deku? Void took a calm step forward, his polished shoes crunching on the debris. I am demonstrating a new philosophy. I am showing the world that a hero society built on the genetic lottery is a fragile house of cards. And I am using the tools you all gave me to do it. He looked directly into Bakugo's crimson eyes, and for the first time, a flicker of something ancient and cold stirred in his own. Hello, Kaken. Did you ever think your words would help create something like this? Bakugo's blood ran cold. He was suddenly back on the school grounds, smoke rising from a singed notebook. If you think you'll have a quirk in your next life, go take a swan dive off a roof. The words, spoken with casual, thoughtless cruelty, now echoed in this ruined hellscape as a horrifying prophecy. Had he actually done this? The thought was shattered by a roar of pure, unadulterated rage. Bakugo's mind couldn't process the guilt, the confusion, so it defaulted to its primary setting, violence. You bastard! He launched himself forward, his hands crackling with more power than he had ever summoned before. He wasn't aiming to incapacitate. He was aiming to obliterate. Void watched the incoming human missile with the dispassionate air of a scientist observing a chemical reaction. He raised a single, open palm. A faint, almost invisible shimmer, like heat haze, enveloped it. He didn't meet Bakugo's explosive charge head-on. He simply angled his hand, catching the very edge of Bakugo's momentum. It was like hitting a patch of frictionless ice. Bakugo's trajectory, so powerful and direct, was instantly diverted. He shot past Void, his massive explosion detonating against the far wall of the building, bringing a chunk of the ceiling down. He tumbled through the cloud of dust, confused and disoriented. Kinetic reversal, Void explained, his hand and suit completely unscathed. A gift. One of many. It's a purely defensive quirk, useless for a traditional hero, but for a strategist, it ensures the battle is never fought on my opponent's terms. You cannot defeat me with brute force, Kaken. You are trying to solve an equation by screaming at it. Shut up! Shut up! Bakugo screamed, scrambling to his feet for another attack. But it was too late. From behind him, a purple-black mist enveloped him and Kirishima. They were warped instantly, reappearing not in another zone, but in the central plaza, where they landed in a heap. They were not alone. One by one, every other student from Class 1A was being warped back to the center, deposited like packages. Todoroki, Momo, Tsuyu, Tokoemi, all of them, looking battered, confused, and utterly defeated. Several were already contained in thick, metallic nets. Void walked calmly out from the collapsed zone, Shigaraki and Kurojiri flanking him. He stood before the assembled, defeated class. A few tried to stand and fight, but the Noma was there in an instant, a terrifying sentinel that cowed them back into submission. Void tapped his tablet. Phase 2 is complete. All student combatants have been neutralized without a single casualty. Their data has been recorded. Their spirits have been tested. He looked over the sea of young, terrified faces, the future of heroism, and felt nothing. No satisfaction. No remorse. It was simply a necessary step. You see, he said, his voice once again being amplified for all to hear. This is the failure of your system. You have been taught that your power makes you special, that your quirks make you heroes, but faced with a true strategy you are helpless. Your strength, your ice, your explosions, they are just colors of paint thrown against a fortress wall. Meaningless. He looked over at Aizawa, who was bleeding and broken, pinned under the Noma's massive hand. Even your teachers, the seasoned professionals, are just cogs in a flawed machine. It was then that the massive doors to the USJ exploded inward, and there, wreathed in dust and righteous fury, stood All Might. He was not smiling. "I am here," he boomed, his voice a tidal wave of power that seemed to shake the very foundations of the dome. Shigaraki practically vibrated with glee. "Finally! The final boss has arrived!" But Void simply held up a hand, and Shigaraki fell silent. Void's eyes met All Might's across the plaza. There was no fear in his gaze. Only cold, analytical appraisal. "All Might," Void's amplified voice echoed. "You're late. According to the UA schedule, you should have been here from the start, but my sources indicated a prior engagement, a television interview that ran long. You see how your celebrity status compromises your duty? You were posing for cameras while your students were walking into a trap." All Might's eyes widened slightly. He had been late. "No matter," Void continued, his tone dangerously calm. "Your presence here was always part of the calculation. But you have misunderstood your role. You are not here to be the hero, you are here to be the audience." He tapped another command into his tablet. On the far side of the dome, a small, cloaked figure who had been hiding near the comms tower finished patching a device into the main broadcast line. "What are you doing?" All Might demanded, taking a thunderous step forward. "I am changing the channel," Void said. He turned his back on All Might, a gesture of supreme, calculated disrespect, and faced his defeated classmates. "This was never about you. It was never about killing All Might. It was about this moment." Across Japan, television programs were interrupted. Emergency broadcast alerts blared from phones and public speakers. The image that appeared was a live feed from a security camera inside the USJ. It showed the symbol of peace, standing impotently at the entrance. It showed the battered and bleeding form of Eraserhead. And it showed an entire class of UAs, best and brightest, defeated and huddled together like lost children. And over this image of absolute heroic failure, a calm, clear voice spoke to the nation. "Citizens of Japan. For decades you have placed your faith in these people. These heroes. You have worshipped them as gods, trusting in their power to protect you. Look at your television screens. See the truth. See the symbol of peace, arriving too late. See your protectors, broken and helpless. See the future of heroism, already defeated." The camera feed zoomed in on Void, who stood before them all, a lone, dark figure in perfect control. "Your heroes cannot protect you from a broken system. They are the system. A system of fame, power, and genetic privilege that has left the world stagnant and vulnerable. We are not here to burn your world down. We are the cure for the disease you have mistaken for a pantheon. This is not an attack. It is a promise. The age of heroes is over. A new age of order is about to begin." The broadcast cut out, returning to panicked news anchors, and a nation plunged into collective shock. In the USJ, All Might let out a roar of fury and charged. "You villain, Kurojiri!" Void said, his voice back to its normal volume. "Our work here is done." The purple-black mist swirled around Void, Shigaraki, and the Noma. Shigaraki waved a taunting goodbye. Void simply gave All Might one last, empty look. By the time All Might reached the center of the plaza, they were gone. All that was left was a scene of utter humiliation. The villains had vanished. The students were safe, but they were defeated. Aizawa was critically injured, and the entire world had just witnessed it. The news cycle didn't just explode, it went supernova. The footage was played on a loop on every channel. Pundits debated, politicians gave panic statements, and the public reeled in terror and confusion. The League of Villains, once a C-list threat, was now the most terrifying organization in the country. But no one was talking about Shigaraki or the monster. They were talking about the calm, intelligent voice that had orchestrated the entire event. They were talking about the mysterious new leader who had outsmarted UA and humiliated All Might on a national stage. They were talking about Void. And for the first time in a generation, the people of Japan looked up at the heroes in the sky, not with adoration, but with a creeping, corrosive seed of doubt. The symphony was over, but its chilling echoes were just beginning. The aftermath of the USJ incident was not a firestorm. It was a plague. A sickness of fear and doubt that seeped into the very foundations of Heroes Society. Void's message, broadcast into millions of homes, had been a masterstroke of psychological warfare. He hadn't declared war with bombs and threats, but with a simple, poisonous question: what if they can't protect you? The media became a cannibal, devouring itself in a frenzy of speculation. News channels, once little more than hero PR outlets, now hosted frantic debates. Who was Void? Where did he come from? Was he right? That last question was the most dangerous, whispered in hushed tones at first, then spoken with increasing boldness in online forums and late-night talk shows. The HPSC scrambled to do damage control, issuing statements of reassurance that rang hollow against the stark, looped footage of a defeated Class 1A and a helpless All Might. In the shadowy depths of his subterranean headquarters, Void observed the chaos he had wrought with the detached satisfaction of an architect watching his demolition plan proceed flawlessly. The data from the USJ incident was invaluable. He had detailed combat logs on every student, recordings of their quirk usage, and psychological profiles updated in real time based on their reactions to his tailored traps. But the true victory was the narrative he had seized. He was no longer an unknown. He was a symbol. The rabble are clamoring to join, Shigaraki reported, scratching his neck with a sound like sandpaper on bone. He was scrolling through a list of applicants on a monitor, his expression a mixture of glee and irritation. Thugs, thieves, wannabe warlords, they all want in on the action. Void stood before a massive holographic map of Japan, which currently displayed media sentiment analysis as a heat map. The entire Kanto region was a burning red of fear and uncertainty. We are not building a gang, Tamura, he said, not turning around. Thugs are liabilities. They are driven by greed and impulse. They are easily bought, easily frightened, and easily broken. A mob is not an army. So what then? Shigaraki grumbled. We just sit here and watch TV? No, Void replied, his voice echoing slightly in the command center. We are not gathering soldiers. We are gathering apostles. We don't need mercenaries who fight for pay. We need believers who will kill, and die, for a cause. He finally turned, his calm green eyes fixing on his rival. And to find them, you cannot simply post a recruitment notice. You must seek out the truly disaffected. The ones who already hate this world as much as we do, but lack the vision to tear it down. He had 3 targets in mind. 3 individuals whose actions had registered as significant blips on his analytical radar. They were not mere criminals. They were ideologues, fanatics, broken souls lashing out at the world in ways that were inefficient, but pure. They were the raw materials for his new world order. His first target was the most prominent, a specter haunting the city of Hosu. The air in the back alleys of Hosu smelled of stale ramen, wet concrete, and old blood. It was a labyrinth of shadows and secrets, a place where heroes rarely patrolled and justice was a foreign concept. This was the hunting ground of the hero killer, Stain. Void moved through the darkness with a silent, fluid grace. He wore a simple, dark ensemble, black trousers, a high-collared charcoal coat, and gloves. He was unarmed and alone, a deliberate choice. To approach a predator like Stain with an entourage was a sign of fear. To come alone was a sign of respect, or of supreme, arrogant confidence. In Void's case, it was both. His synaptic flow quirk was on high alert, processing the ambient sounds of the city, the distant wail of a siren, the clatter of a dropped bottle, the whisper of the wind through narrow passages. He had predicted Stain's next target, the pro-hero, Ingenium. The hero's patrol routes were rigid and his sense of self-righteousness made him a perfect target for Stain's crusade. Void wasn't here to save the hero. He was here to intercept the killer. He found him in a small, dead-end alley, standing over the broken and bleeding form of Ingenium. The hero's gleaming silver armor was dented and smeared with his own blood. Stain was a terrifying figure, a man composed of sharp angles and ragged edges. His emaciated frame was bound in leather and metal, his face mostly obscured by a tattered mask and a long, blood-red scarf that writhed like a living thing. The sheer, unadulterated conviction radiating from him was a palpable force, a scorching heat that Void's empathic quirk could feel from 50 feet away. You have felled another false idol, hero killer. Void's voice was calm and even, cutting through the tense silence. Stain whirled around, his body coiling like a serpent. He held a bloody katana in one hand and a jagged knife in the other. His eyes, visible through the slits in his mask, were wide with a fanatic's fire. Who are you? He hissed, his voice a low, guttural rasp. Another scavenger, here to pick at the scraps? Or a fool seeking a quick death? Neither, Void replied, taking a slow, deliberate step forward, his hands held open at his sides. I am an admirer of your work. Your philosophy, at least. Stain let out a short, sharp laugh that held no humor. Philosophy? The vultures in the media call it a man's rambling. What would a child in a fancy coat know of it? He tensed, ready to lunge. The bloodlust coming off him was a tangible wave of pressure. You reek of the same ambition as the fake cycle. What is your goal? Fame? Power? To make a name for yourself in the underworld? My goal, Void said, meeting the killer's intense gaze without flinching, is to succeed where you are destined to fail. That was the spark. Stain shot forward, a blur of red and black, faster than any pro-hero Void had ever analyzed. His blade sliced through the air with a hungry hiss, aimed directly at Void's heart. Void's kinetic reversal shimmered to life. He didn't try to block the katana. He simply shifted his weight, and used his palm to brush against the flat of the blade as it flew past him. The sword's momentum was instantly and violently warped. Stain, an expert martial artist, was caught completely off guard as his own weapon tried to wrench itself from his grasp, pulling him off balance and forcing him into an uncontrolled stumble. He recovered instantly, spinning around and slashing with his knife, but Void had already created distance, moving with an eerie, frictionless grace. You are strong. Fast. Your technique is flawless, Void stated, his tone that of a critic reviewing a performance. But your vision is myopic. You are a surgeon, meticulously and passionately removing individual tumors while ignoring the cancer that riddles the patient's entire body. Stain paused, his head cocked. The boy hadn't attacked back. He had only defended. And his words, they held a strange resonance. Speak plainly, or I will cut out your tongue. You kill fake heroes, one by one, Void explained, beginning to pace slowly. You hold All Might up as the one true standard. It's a noble, if simplistic, worldview. But what happens when you die? What have you accomplished? You will have killed a dozen, perhaps 100 heroes. And the system, the great, corrupt machine that produces them, will replace them without a second thought. New celebrities will rise. New brands will be built. Your entire life's work will be a footnote, a bloody but ultimately meaningless chapter in the history of a society that will not change. He stopped and looked directly at Stain. You are trying to prune a sick tree one branch at a time. I will uproot it entirely and salt the earth where it stood. Stain was silent, processing. The conviction rolling off him was still there, but it was now tinged with a flicker of something else, curiosity. You are the one from the USJ. The voice. Void. It wasn't a question. I am. You speak of changing the world, Stain rasped, but you ally yourself with street trash like that hand-covered degenerate. You are just another villain, using pretty words to justify your own lust for destruction. Shigaraki is a tool. A symbol of the chaos that this society breeds, Void countered smoothly. He is the wrecking ball. I am the architect who directs it. Do not mistake my instruments for my ambition. My ambition is order. A true, absolute order where heroism is not a popularity contest. A world where worth is measured by conviction and utility, not by the flashy nature of one's quirk. A world, hero killer, where every single hero would have to meet your standards, or be purged. This was the core of the argument. He wasn't just validating Stain's ideology. He was offering to make it global, to codify it into law. Stain's breathing was heavy. He was a man of singular, obsessive focus. He had never considered a scale beyond his own two hands, his own blades. Void was presenting him with a vision that was both terrifying and intoxicatingly seductive. Conviction. Stain murmured, testing the word. It is the only thing that matters. The fakes I kill have none. They are hollow. What is your conviction, boy? What right do you have to speak of a new world? What fire fuels you? This was the final test. Void's lie detection quirk could feel the weight of Stain's question. It was not rhetorical. The answer would determine if he lived or died. Void's calm facade finally broke, just for a second. A shadow of the broken boy on the rooftop passed over his features. The empathic waves of his own memory, his own pain, radiated outwards, a cold, dark truth that Stain could feel in the air between them. My conviction was forged in the ruins of a shattered dream, Void said, his voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. It was baptized in the casual cruelty of a society that looks at a child and sees only a label, quirkless, useless. My fire was lit by the symbol of peace himself, the very man you idolize, when he looked me in the eye and told me to give up. My conviction is this: a world that judges a soul by the power of its flesh is a world that deserves to burn. I will not prune the tree, Stain. I will incinerate the entire forest, and from the ashes, I will cultivate a garden where only the truly worthy are allowed to grow. The alley was silent save for the drip of Ingenium's blood onto the pavement. Stain stood perfectly still, his blades held loose at his sides. The furious, murderous aura around him had dissipated, replaced by a profound, almost religious awe. He was looking at Void, but he was seeing something else, the ultimate product of the societal sickness he so despised. A soul so thoroughly broken by the hero system that he had returned to unmake it entirely. Slowly, deliberately, Kaizo Makaguro, the man known as Stain, lowered his katana. The current hero paradigm has failed, Stain declared, his voice a low prayer. It has created a monster with a conviction far greater than any of the fakes I have hunted. He took a step forward and did something Void had not anticipated. He knelt, resting his sword on the ground before him. You speak of a culling. Of a new standard. My crusade has been a solitary one, inefficient, as you say. If you are the fire that will burn this world clean, then allow my blades to be the kindling. Void looked down at the kneeling zealot. He had not expected fealty, only an alliance. This was better. He had not just recruited a soldier. He had converted a prophet. Rise, Stain, Void commanded, his voice regaining its composure. You will be more than kindling. You will be the scalpel that cuts the last vestiges of sickness from our new world. You will be its judge. His next acquisitions were of a different nature. They were not ideologues. They were forces of nature, passion given form. He arranged a meeting in the husk of an abandoned chemical plant on the industrial outskirts of Yokohama, a place of rust, decay, and shattered glass. He sat on a crate in the center of the vast, echoing main floor, flanked by a silent Kurogiri. His targets arrived together, a study in contrasts. The girl, Himiko Toga, bounced into the room, her movements light and airy, like a dancer. She wore a simple schoolgirl uniform. Her blonde hair was in two messy buns, and a wide, almost manic grin was stretched across her face. Her eyes, a strange amber gold, darted around the room, taking everything in with a hungry, predatory curiosity. The emotional energy coming off her was a chaotic storm of joy, bloodlust, and a desperate, aching loneliness. The man, Dabi, was her opposite. He moved with a slow, deliberate swagger, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of a long, dark coat. His face was a patchwork of scarred, purple flesh held together by surgical staples, a gruesome mask that failed to hide the cold, intelligent fury burning in his turquoise eyes. His emotional signature was a focused, patient inferno of pure, refined hatred. So, Dabi drawled, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. The famous Void. You've been making quite a splash. Got a job for us, or did you just bring us here to admire the decor? Toga giggled, a sound like tiny, breaking bells. It's so spooky. I love it. Are you really the one who made All Might look so silly on TV? You're kinda cute up close. Can I cut you a little? Void ignored Dabi's cynicism and Toga's disturbing enthusiasm. He addressed the girl first, his voice soft. Himiko Toga. You find the world difficult, don't you? It asks you to be something you're not. It tells you that the things you love, the things that make your heart beat fast, are wrong. Evil. Toga's bouncing stopped. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He was seeing her. Really seeing her. The world is so stuffy, she pouted. They don't understand what it means to really love someone, to want to be them. To become them. To taste them on your tongue. I understand, Void said, and his empath's deceit quirk allowed him to project a sliver of genuine, calculated understanding. I don't see a monster when I look at you, Toga. I see passion that has been denied a proper outlet. I am building a world where you will never have to hide who you are again. A world where you can love as deeply and as freely as you wish, where you can become anyone you desire. I am offering you a playground, not a prison. Toga's eyes widened, shining with a dangerous, ecstatic light. She clasped her hands together under her chin. A playground? For me? Oh, I like you. I like you a lot, Dobby scoffed, a plume of smoke-like condensation escaping his lips. Don't fall for the sweet talk, crazy. He's a villain, same as us. He wants something. He fixed his piercing gaze on Void. So, what is it? What's the catch? You want a couple more disposable knives for your collection? Void turned his full attention to Dobby. This would require a different approach. He had to bypass the cynicism and speak directly to the furnace of hate at the man's core. I have no interest in disposable tools, Void stated. I am assembling a cabinet of specialists. Toga is a master of infiltration and psychological terror. Stain is a symbol of righteous fury. And you are an artist whose medium is fire. He paused, letting the silence stretch. I've read your file. Or rather, the lack of one. You have no history, no records, no name. You simply appeared a few years ago, a ghost with a powerful cremation quirk and a particular fondness for targeting assets connected to the number 2 hero, Endeavor. Dobby's posture stiffened. The air around him seemed to grow warmer. Get to the point. Your grudge is obvious, but your methods are inefficient, Void said, echoing the sentiment he had used with Stain. You burn a few warehouses, kill a few low-level heroes associated with his agency. These are pinpricks. Annoyances. They don't touch the man himself. They don't damage his reputation, his legacy. The pillar of flame he has built his life upon. Void stood up from the crate and took a step closer. I am not offering you the chance to fight Endeavor. I am offering you the chance to utterly and completely destroy him. Not just his body. His name, his legacy. Everything he has ever built. Dobby's eyes narrowed into slits of turquoise fire. Talk is cheap, is it? Void asked. He gestured to Kurogyri, who produced a tablet. Void took it and held it out. On the screen was a heavily redacted file, but the name at the top was clear, Todoroki, Toya. Status, deceased, presumed. Dobby froze. The smoldering hatred within him erupted into a raging inferno. Void could feel it, a wave of shock, fear, and murderous rage so potent it was almost physical. How? Dobby choked out, his voice losing its cool effect for the first time. My resources are extensive, Toya Todoroki, Void said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. I know who you are. I know what he did to you. I know about the abuse, the obsession, the relentless pressure that pushed your body past its limits until you were burned away and left for dead. And I know that the HPSC helped him cover it all up to protect the image of their number 2 hero. He pulled the tablet back. You want revenge? Killing him is letting him off easy. He'll die a martyr, a hero struck down by a villain. I am offering you true vengeance. I am in the process of acquiring the HPSC's complete, unredacted archives. I will give you the stage. The entire world will be your audience. You will not just kill Endeavor. You will stand before the world and tell them your story. You will be the one to turn their shining hero into a reviled monster. I am not offering you a bonfire. I am offering you an inferno that will consume a nation, with him at its very center. For a long minute, Dobby said nothing. He just stared at Void, his scarred face a mask of conflicting, violent emotions. He was a man who had trusted no one, who had lived as a ghost fueled only by his own hate. And now, this teenager was offering him the one thing he had never believed possible, perfect, absolute, poetic justice. Finally, a slow, terrible smile stretched across Dobby's stapled features. You've got a deal, he rasped, his voice filled with the promise of future carnage. You give me Endeavor on a platter, and my flames are yours to command. The main strategy room was dark, illuminated only by the soft blue glow of the central holographic projector. The new recruits stood assembled. Stain stood ramrod straight, his fanaticism now channeled into a disciplined, unwavering loyalty. Toga fidgeted excitedly, her grin wider than ever, finally among people she considered fun. Dalby leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his turquoise eyes burning with a new, focused purpose. Shigaraki sat at the table, scratching his neck, watching the newcomers with a mixture of jealousy and grudging respect for Void's manipulative genius. Void stood at the head of the table, observing his new lieutenants. They were a collection of broken toys, of monsters and madmen. But they were his monsters. "Welcome," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. "You are the first. The core of a new movement. But we cannot move forward under our current banner. The League of Villains is a name for children and thugs. It inspires fear, but not loyalty. It suggests chaos, not ideology." He gestured to the holographic display. The old, hand-themed logo of the League fizzled and vanished, replaced by a new symbol, a stark, stylized P that also resembled a pillar, with two sharp, angular L's flanking it like wings, and an F forming its base. "From this day forward, we have a new name. A new identity," Void declared, his voice ringing with authority. "We are the vanguard of a new era. We are the architects of a world built on true merit. We are the ones who will free this society from the gilded cage of heroism it has built for itself." He paused, letting his gaze sweep over each of them. Stain the judge, Dalby the vengeance, Toga the chaos, Shigaraki the destruction. His pieces were in place. "We are the Paragon Liberation Front." The name hung in the air, heavy with promise and menace. It was a declaration, a mission statement, and a threat all in one. He looked at the faces of his apostles, a collection of society's rejects, now united under his banner. The foundations had been laid. The pillars of his empire were being raised. And soon, the entire world would feel their shadow. The war for Japan's soul was not declared with a cataclysmic explosion or a grand, villainous monologue. It began as a whisper. A cascade of digital ghosts released from the machine. Void's war was one of 1,000 cuts, a slow, methodical exsanguination of the trust and stability upon which hero society was built. Operation Rainfall had not yet begun, but its prelude, which Void had internally designated Phase 2, destabilization, was in full swing. He sat in the darkened command center, a modern-day emperor in a throne of data, watching the world burn not with fire, but with information. The terabytes of compromising data stolen from the HPSC servers were his arsenal, each file a precision-guided missile aimed at the heart of the public's faith. The first strike was surgical. A minor but beloved hero in the Chubu region, Craterface, known for his selfless rescue work and humble demeanor, was revealed to have been systematically embezzling from hero-centric charities for years. The proof, released anonymously through a dozen encrypted channels, was undeniable: bank statements, laundered accounts, damning emails. The public outcry was immediate and vicious. The hero wasn't just arrested, he was socially crucified. The narrative Void carefully attached to the leak was simple and potent. If even the good ones are rotten, who can you trust? The second strike was economic. Void, using his eidetic memory of corporate financial records and the predictive power of synaptic flow, orchestrated a series of small, targeted villain attacks. A PLF cell, composed of Shigaraki's brutish recruits, would hit a specific shipping warehouse belonging to Deconstructing. The attack itself was a failure by heroic standards. The villains were driven off quickly by a local hero. But the real goal was achieved. The warehouse contained a key component for Deconstructing's new line of support gear. Its destruction caused a 2-week production delay. On the same day, an anonymous, expertly written financial analysis was leaked to several major investment firms, highlighting a previously unnoticed instability in Deconstructing's supply chain. The result was a cascade. Deconstructing's stock plummeted by 30%. Their main rival, whose facilities remained untouched, saw their own stock soar. The heroes who had endorsed Deconstructing's products saw their approval ratings dip. The public saw a hero society that couldn't even protect its own economic interests. It was a domino effect, perfectly calculated and flawlessly executed, that cost the hero industry billions of yen and fostered a deep sense of economic insecurity. The third front of the war was social. Void's agents, cloaked in the anonymity of the internet, began funding and amplifying anti-hero sentiment. They didn't create the movements. They simply nurtured the seeds of discontent that were already there. Online forums for quirkless rights activists, groups protesting excessive collateral damage, and conspiracy theorists who believed heroes were staging fights for publicity, all saw a sudden, inexplicable surge in support and visibility. Memes mocking heroes went viral. Well-edited videos contrasting a hero's destructive battle with their smiling face on a cereal box became commonplace. Void was teaching the nation his own cynical worldview, one pixel at a time. The Paragon Liberation Front was rarely mentioned. They were the ghost in the machine, the invisible hand guiding the fall. The public didn't feel like they were being attacked by villains. They felt like they were waking up to a truth that had been hidden from them all along. This new form of warfare was a source of constant frustration for the heroes. How do you punch a stock market crash? How do you arrest a viral meme? Their methods were obsolete, their power useless against an enemy who refused to engage in a physical fight. They were knights in shining armor, prepared for a dragon, finding themselves instead besieged by a plague of locusts. At the heart of the storm, within the walls of UA High, another, more personal war was being waged. Katsuki Bakugo slammed his fist into a training dummy, the resulting explosion ripping the reinforced mannequin from its moorings and sending it flying into the far wall of the gymnasium. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the cavernous space. Sweat poured down his face, his breathing was ragged, and his muscles screamed in protest, but he didn't stop. Again, he snarled to the empty room. He had been like this for weeks, pushing himself past every conceivable limit. His grades were still perfect, his combat scores higher than ever, but the arrogant, boisterous swagger was gone. It had been replaced by a grim, obsessive focus that unsettled his classmates and worried his teachers. He wasn't just training his body. He was trying to outrun his own mind. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw him. Deku. Not the crying, pathetic nerd he remembered, but the cold, composed figure in the black suit. Void. Did you ever think your words would help create something like this? The question was a brand on his soul. It replayed in his head 1,000 times a day, each time with a new, horrifying layer of meaning. He remembered every cruel word, every casual act of bullying, every time he had pushed Izuku down and told him he was worthless. He had been planting seeds his whole life, never once considering what they might grow into. And now, he was staring at the twisted, poisonous forest that had sprung up in his wake. This wasn't rivalry. It was something far deeper, far more terrifying. It was guilt. A profound, soul-crushing guilt that was as alien to him as fear had once been. He, Katsuki Bakugo, the boy destined for greatness, had helped create the most dangerous villain of their generation. His obsession was twofold. First, he had to become stronger. Strong enough to beat Void, to physically overpower the cold strategy that had dismantled their entire class. He believed, with a desperate, primal certainty, that if he could just land one solid punch, just one clean hit, he could somehow knock the Void out of him and find Deku underneath. Second, and more confusingly, he felt an overwhelming, suffocating need to save him. The word itself tasted like ash in his mouth. He didn't want to save a villain. He wanted to fix his mistake. He wanted to drag Izuku Midoriya, kicking and screaming if he had to, back into the light, not for Izuku's sake, but for his own. It was the only path he could see to atonement. Bakugo. He whirled around, his palms crackling. All Might stood in the doorway, not in his muscle form, but as the gaunt, skeletal Toshinori Yagi. He held 2 water bottles in his thin hands. "You'll destroy your body if you keep this up," Toshinori said, his voice soft. "What do you care?" Bakugo snapped, turning back to the wreckage of the training dummy. "I'm not the one you chose." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Since the secret of One for All had been revealed to him, Bakugo had viewed All Might's relationship with Izuku through a new, bitter lens. All Might hadn't just failed Izuku on that rooftop. He had failed him and then chosen him, a paradox that Bakugo's mind couldn't resolve. But now, it was clear that someone else had found Izuku first. Toshinori sighed, the sound weary and full of a guilt that mirrored Bakugo's own. He walked over and set a water bottle down on a bench. "This isn't about One for All. This is about you. And about him. I see the same look in your eyes that I see in the mirror every morning." Bakugo stopped, his fists clenched. He refused to look at the former hero. "I was the one on that rooftop," Toshinori continued, his voice barely a whisper. I was the one who said the words that broke him. I told him his dream was unattainable. I crushed the spirit of a boy who had more heroic potential in his heart than 100 pros with flashy quirks. The man he has become, that is my failure. My sin. Bakugo's shoulders trembled. To hear his own guilt spoken aloud by the man he once worshipped was a strange, painful kind of validation. He chose this path. Bakugo growled, the words a lie he was trying to convince himself of. He's a villain. That's all, is it? Tashinori asked gently. Or is he a boy we all failed? You, me, our entire society. We created the perfect vessel for all for one's hatred, and we never even saw it. He looked at Bakugo, his sunken eyes filled with a deep sorrow. You cannot fix this with your fists, young Bakugo. I have fought all for one twice. His true power isn't the quirks he steals. It's his ability to find the cracks in a person's soul and pour poison into them until they break. The boy you knew is buried under years of that poison. If you ever face him again, you need to be prepared for the fact that you won't be fighting a rival. You'll be fighting a ghost. The words were meant to be a warning, but to Bakugo, they were a challenge. He snatched the water bottle from the bench, drained it in 3 gulps, and threw the empty plastic container against the wall. A ghost? He snarled, a wild, desperate light in his eyes. Then I'll just have to punch hard enough to hit him in the afterlife. He turned and stalked out of the gym, leaving Tashinori alone with the wreckage, a living symbol of a past that had come back to haunt them all. Within the Paragon Liberation Front, a different kind of internal conflict was brewing. While Void's strategic victories were undeniable, they were also bloodless. Intellectual. For some, they were unsatisfying. Tamura Shigaraki sat at the command center's conference table, staring at a news report detailing the Craterface scandal. He was scratching his neck so furiously that flecks of dry skin dusted the polished black surface of the table. This is boring, he declared to the empty room. Scandals. Stock prices. Memes. This isn't what Sensei promised. Where's the destruction? Where's the chaos? When do I get to turn some heroes to dust? His resentment had been festering for months. Void had been given command, his own private quarters, the loyalty of the new recruits, and most gallingly, the praise of all for one. Shigaraki, the heir apparent, had been relegated to the role of a glorified field commander for low-level distraction missions. He was the rabid dog, and Void was the master holding the leash. Every calm, condescendingly logical order he received from the quirkless genius was another grain of salt rubbed into the wound of his pride. He felt sidelined. Obsolete. His entire identity was built on his connection to All for One and the raw destructive power of his quirk. But in Void's War of Whispers, his power was useless. He was a sledgehammer in a game that required a scalpel. The final insult came in the form of a direct order from Void, delivered via a sterile text message. Tamura. Take a unit to the Hosa sector. Create a public disturbance. Nothing major. Draw hero attention away from the financial district. Do not engage any top 10 heroes. This is a feint. Adhere to the parameters. A feint. A distraction. While Void was orchestrating his grand, world-changing schemes from his throne, Shigaraki was being sent out to be a common street thug, a piece to be sacrificed on the chessboard. Something inside him snapped. The rage was a physical thing, a hot, itching poison that spread from his neck through his entire body. His hatred for All Might, for heroes, for the whole world, was momentarily eclipsed by his burning, incandescent jealousy of Void. The pet project. The replacement. The cheap copy who was stealing his birthright. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He wasn't going to be a pawn anymore. He was going to remind everyone, Void Sensei, the whole damned world, who the true symbol of destruction was. He stormed out of the command center and headed for the Nomu containment bay. The plan that formed in his mind was crude, simple, and beautifully, cathartically destructive. He wouldn't just create a disturbance in Hosu. He would unleash hell. He would release 3 of the winged Nomu, creatures of mindless, aerial terror. He would let them tear the city apart. There would be fire, and screaming, and death. It would be an event so chaotic, so undeniably real, that it would completely overshadow Void's pathetic shadow war. It would force the heroes into a real fight. It would force All Might to show up. And in the center of that glorious chaos, he, Tamura Shigaraki, would finally get to play the game his way. He wasn't just disobeying an order. He was sabotaging the entire operation. He knew Void's plan relied on controlling the narrative, on slow, methodical pressure. A massive, bloody attack on a civilian center would shatter that control. It would galvanize the public behind the heroes, reminding them of the value of a protector when faced with real monsters. It would undo months of Void's careful work, and Shigaraki didn't care. In fact, the thought filled him with a malicious glee. If he couldn't be the star player, he would smash the whole damn stadium. Void felt the betrayal before he saw the evidence. His empath's deceit quirk, usually a low hum of ambient emotional data from his subordinates, picked up a sudden, violent spike. It was Shigaraki, a tidal wave of pure, unrestrained rage, jealousy, and destructive intent so powerful it felt like a psychic scream. He was in his private study, analyzing the potential fallout of his next planned leak, evidence of the HPSC suppressing research into quirk-related genetic disorders. He dropped the data slate onto his desk and his eyes narrowed. "Kurogyri," he said, his voice sharp. The misty form of the bartender-turned-teleporter materialized instantly beside him. "Young master, where is Tamura Shigaraki? He has taken a unit and departed for Hosu, as per your instructions." Kurogyri replied, his synthesized voice placid. "Show me the live satellite feed for Hosu City. And access the internal comms for his unit," Void commanded. A holographic display flickered to life, showing a bird's-eye view of the city. Another window opened, displaying a silent, corrupted audio feed. Shigaraki had disabled his comms. Void's mind worked at lightning speed, connecting the data points. The emotional outburst. The disabled communications. The destination, Hosu, a city already on high alert due to Stain's recent activities. It was a powder keg. "He's not running a feint," Void murmured, his voice dangerously low. "He's starting a war." As if on cue, the satellite image zoomed in on a horrifying sight. From a darkened alleyway, 3 monstrous, winged creatures erupted into the sky. The Noma. They let out ear-splitting shrieks and dove toward the crowded city center, their movements jerky and unnatural. Chaos erupted instantly. Cars swerved and crashed. People screamed and ran, a panicked herd of prey. Explosions blossomed as the Noma tore into buildings, their mindless destruction a stark, brutal contrast to Void's calculated precision. The news feeds on Void's monitors lit up like a Christmas tree. This wasn't a whisper anymore. This was a primal, bloody roar. For the first time in 3 years, Void felt a genuine, uncontrolled emotion, fury. It was a cold, black fire that burned in his chest. Shigaraki, in a single, petulant act of jealousy, had threatened to unravel everything. He had thrown a grenade onto the chessboard. But the fury was quickly contained, channeled, and repurposed by his analytical mind. Panic was a waste of energy. This was a new problem. A new equation to be solved. His fingers flew across a console. He was no longer reacting, he was adapting. He had anticipated Shigaraki's instability, of course. He had logged it as a variable, a potential liability. He had even run simulations on possible betrayal scenarios. He had a contingency plan. It was high risk, but the potential rewards were immense. "Kurogyri," he said, his voice now devoid of any anger, as cold and sharp as surgical steel. "Shigaraki has made his move. Now we will make ours. Get me Stain. Now, tell him the city of Hosu is infested with false heroes, and it is time for a grand culling." His second call was to Dabi. "The number 2 hero's son, Ida Tenya, is in Hosu, hunting Stain for crippling his brother. Endeavor himself is en route. The stage you have been waiting for is being set, though not by my design. Go to Hosu. Do not reveal yourself yet. Just add to the flames. Let them see what real chaos looks like." He then opened a secure channel to a small, deep-cover PLF cell within the Hosu City Police Department. "Activate Protocol Chimera. An unknown villain group is attacking the city. Frame the League of Villains. Leak Shigaraki's name and image to the press. ensure all blame for the death and destruction falls squarely upon him. He is to be the face of this tragedy. Void leaned back in his chair, his eyes glowing with the light of a dozen data streams. Shigaraki wanted to smash the game board. Fine. Void would simply use the shattered pieces to build a new one. He would let Shigaraki have his moment of chaos. He would let him be the monster the world needed to fear, and when the dust settled, Void would be the one to step out of the shadows, not as the architect of the chaos, but as the symbol of the order that could rise from its ashes. He would publicly disavow Shigaraki, framing him as a rogue element, a mad dog whose chaotic methods were contrary to the PLF's true, ideological goals. He would use his rival's failure to further his own narrative. All for One's voice, a low, amused rumble, came from a speaker in the corner of the room. He had been watching the entire time. Ingenious! The ancient villain purred. You are turning your insubordinate pawn into your greatest asset. You are allowing him to hang himself, and you will sell tickets to the execution. There was a long pause. I am impressed, my boy. You are proving to be everything I had hoped for. Void didn't reply. He was already running a dozen new simulations, predicting hero response times, calculating potential casualty numbers, and drafting the public statement the Paragon Liberation Front would release in the aftermath. Shigaraki had started a battle of fists and fire in the streets of Hosu. Void would win the war from a dark room, miles away, with nothing but whispers and a will of iron. The king was on his throne, and he would not suffer a fool's rebellion to go unpunished, or unexploited.